The shrieks of the alien child echoed through the cavernous ship as the human ripped its still-beating heart out through the ribcage, a clear warning to the rest of the galaxy to never fuck with mankind, not even our kids. Horus had made a fatal mistake trying to capture that human child on that desolate rock. Greg Wright was no ordinary human mercenary. He was the elite Black Ops killing machine forged from pure steel. But even more worrying to the aliens should have been the kid, a feral, scraggly child hardened by life in the fringe colonies. When Horus lunged at the kid, he expected the whelp to cower behind Greg. Instead, the child bared its teeth and sunk them into Horus's leg as he got close. Razor-sharp baby teeth shredded alien muscle and sinew. Horus let out an agonized yowl. Incensed, Greg lit up his plasma rifle and hosed the Akamarian down with superheated energy bolts. Horus dropped, thrashing, as his flesh sizzled away. The merc stomped over and jammed the barrel under his foe's chin. "What did I tell you?" Greg growled. "We humans look after our own. I won't let anyone touch this kid. He's coming with me, and if your Akamarian Empire has a problem with that, they can fucking try me." Greg slung the child onto his shoulders and headed for his ship. Earth was about to face an existential war for survival now that a human child was in play. The alien empires would rain hell down on the humans to snatch this kid, not grasping that even mankind's children could be its most lethal weapons. Greg guided his starship, the Nomad, into the docking bay of the massive space station that orbited a swirling gas giant. He stepped out onto the landing pad, the feral child still perched on his shoulders. Waiting for him was Rask, a grizzled old merc who ran the black markets on this station. Rask eyed the child. "What have you got there, Wright?" Rask grunted. "A stray I picked up on Zeta 9. Horus and his goons were after the kid. I need you to watch them while I resupply," Greg replied. Rask nodded slowly. He knew all about Horus. "Horus, huh? That bastard's been a thorn in our side for years. You sure you want to get mixed up in this?" Greg just shrugged. "I'm already in it. Might as well see it through." He followed Rask into the bustling heart of the station, haggling for ammo and ration packs. But as he bartered, the child wandered off his shoulders, drawn by the sights and sounds of the alien market. The kid slipped away unseen. Suddenly, a squad of Akamarian soldiers burst into the station concourse in a clatter of armored boots. They were led by a hulking Akamarian commander, his face twisted with rage. "Search every corner," the commander roared. "The human child is here somewhere." The kid heard the angry voices and darted into a storage room to hide. The room was packed with crates of illegal weapons. The soldiers stomped closer, sweeping the station. The child could hear the heavy footfalls approaching the door. Small hands grabbed a plasma grenade from an open crate. The child's fingers closed around the explosive. The storage room door crashed open as the Akamarian commander kicked it in. The alien loomed in the doorway, a fearsome sight. Without hesitation, the child hurled the armed grenade. It stuck to the commander's breastplate and exploded in a flash, sending armor fragments and bodies flying. Smoke filled the room. Greg and Rask sprinted towards the explosion. They skidded to a stop, finding the child standing unscathed in the middle of the blasted wreckage. The kid clutched a second grenade, ready to throw. Rask gaped at the destroyed Akamarians. "Holy shit, the kid's a natural!" "We need to get off this station now," Greg barked, scooping up the child. "Horus won't stop until he has the kid." They sprinted for the Nomad, energy bolts scorching the walls as they ran. The Akamarian troops were recovering, blasters firing. Greg and the child leapt into the ship. As the Nomad peeled out of the station, Greg looked at the deadly, serious child in the co-pilot's seat. Maybe this feral kid was the key to something much bigger, something that could shift the fate of the war between mankind and the alien empires. The Nomad's engines screamed as Greg pushed them to their limits, the ship tearing through hyperspace like a bat out of hell. In the ship's cramped living quarters, he knelt next to Luca, cleaning the cuts on the kid's face with a damp cloth. "What's your name, kid? Where are you from?" Greg asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Luca's eyes were wide with shock, staring at nothing. "Luca, I'm from Earth," the child whispered. Greg's brow furrowed. "Earth? How the hell did you end up way out here?" Before Luca could respond, a shrill alarm pierced the air, red lights flashing. Greg sprinted to the cockpit, his boots pounding on the metal grates. Rask was hunched over the sensor array, his face grim. "We've got company," Rask growled. "Horus's ship, the Velox, just dropped out of hyperspace behind us." "Fuck," Greg spat. "The bastard must have tracked us from the station. Can we outrun him?" Rask shook his head. "Not a chance. The Velox is faster and better armed. We need to find a place to lay low until we can shake him." Greg's eyes raked over the star map, searching for a way out. His gaze landed on a nearby system, and a desperate plan began to take shape. "Set course for the Kyrian asteroid field," he ordered. "We'll lose them in the rocks." Rask's hands flew over the controls, the Nomad banking hard as it plunged into the treacherous asteroid field. The ship wove and dodged through the tumbling rocks, its hull groaning under the strain. Behind them, the Velox closed in, its laser cannons hammering the Nomad's shields. In the living quarters, Luca curled into a ball, hands clamped over ears to block out the deafening impacts. The ship shuddered and bucked, throwing the child against the walls. Suddenly, a stray asteroid slammed into the Nomad's flank, sending the ship careening out of control. Greg fought with the controls, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The hyperdrive sputtered and died, the shields collapsing. The Velox loomed in the view screen, its weapons glowing as they charged up for a final devastating salvo. Greg's mind raced, searching for a way out. His eyes fell on the largest asteroid in sight, and he made his choice. Greg aimed the Nomad's remaining missiles at the asteroid and fired. The missiles streaked away, slamming into the rock and detonating in a blinding flash. The asteroid exploded, hurling debris in all directions. The Velox swerved to avoid the flying rocks, its shields flickering as it took hit after hit. Greg seized the chance, guiding the crippled Nomad into a narrow crevice within the asteroid. He powered down all non-essential systems, praying they hadn't been spotted. As they waited for the Velox to pass, Greg turned to Rask. "We need answers. Why is Horus so hell-bent on capturing this kid? What's so special about them?" Rask shrugged. "I've heard rumors, whispers of a secret Akamarian project involving human children, something about harnessing their untapped potential, but I never put much stock in it. Until now." In the living quarters, Luca had fallen into a fitful sleep, exhausted by the ordeal. Greg watched the child, a sense of grim determination settling over him. He knew that protecting this kid was more than just another job. It was the key to unraveling a sinister plot, one that threatened not just Earth but the entire galaxy. The battered Nomad crawled out from the asteroid's craggy embrace, its hull scored with fresh scars. Inside, Greg and Rask hunched over the sparking control panels, their faces cast in an eerie glow by the flickering lights. Sweat beaded on Greg's brow as he coaxed the hyperdrive back to life, the ship shuddering as it limped into open space. Rask leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. "We're flying on borrowed time here, right? Shields are shot, weapons are fried. We need to find somewhere to lay low and lick our wounds." Greg opened his mouth to reply, but a faint ping from the comm panel cut him off. He frowned, leaning in to adjust the frequency. The ping sharpened into a distress signal, its urgency palpable even through the static. "It's coming from a planet nearby," Greg said, pulling up the system map. "Axion Prime, frontier world, mostly lawless settlements. Not exactly a vacation spot." Greg nodded grimly, plotting a course for Axion Prime. The Nomad banked hard, its engines straining as it limped towards the planet's dusty surface. As the ship settled onto the cracked concrete of a rundown spaceport, a ragtag group of human colonists emerged from the ramshackle buildings, weapons clutched tightly in calloused hands. At their head strode a woman with a shock of silver hair and a face weathered by hardship. She aimed a battered rifle at the Nomad's hatch as it hissed open. "State your business," she barked, her voice sharp as a whip crack. Greg stepped out, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Easy there, we picked up your distress call, thought you could use a hand." The woman lowered her rifle a fraction. Her eyes narrowed. "Name's Asher, and we've got more than enough trouble to go around. Akamarian raiders have been hitting our settlement hard, snatching up kids left and right. We're barely hanging on as it is." Greg and Rask traded a loaded glance, the pieces falling into place. "Sounds like this might be connected to those rumors we heard about," Rask muttered under his breath. Greg turned back to Asher, his jaw set. "We'll help you defend the settlement, and we'll get those kids back, I promise." Asher studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "We'll take all the help we can get. Follow me." As they made their way into the settlement, Greg caught a glimpse of Luca's face, the child's eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. He felt a pang of recognition, remembering his own scrappy childhood on the mean streets of a distant Earth city. He'd be damned if he let these kids suffer the same fate. The colonists worked frantically to shore up the settlement's defenses, welding scrap metal into barricades and jury-rigging traps from salvaged mines. Greg and Rask threw themselves into the preparations, their skills honed by years of fighting on the fringes of civilized space. Suddenly a shout rang out from the perimeter. "Raiders incoming!" Greg whirled, his plasma rifle snapping up to his shoulder. His blood ran cold as he saw the ships streaking towards them, their hulls emblazoned with the cruel sigil of the Akamarian Empire. And there, at the head of the formation, was the Velox, its deadly silhouette unmistakable. All hell broke loose as the raiders descended on the settlement, plasma bolts and shrapnel filling the air. Greg dove for cover behind a crumbling wall, laying down a withering hail of fire. Beside him, Rask lobbed a grenade into a knot of Akamarian soldiers, the explosion sending bodies flying. But even as they fought with desperate ferocity, Greg could see they were outmatched. The Akamarians had them outnumbered and outgunned, their superior weaponry cutting through the defenders like a scythe through wheat. In the chaos of the battle, Luca slipped away unseen. The child crept through the smoke and rubble, making for the Akamarian command ship. Ducking past patrols and sentry drones, Luca managed to sneak aboard, driven by a burning need for answers. And there on the bridge stood Horus himself. The imposing Akamarian warrior loomed over the child, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. Luca stood their ground, fists clenched at their sides. "Why are you doing this?" Luca demanded, their voice shaking with anger and fear. "Why are you taking human children?" Horus cocked his head, regarding the child like a predator sizing up its prey. "You have no idea of the power you possess, child. Your species is capable of so much more than you realize. We are simply unlocking your true potential." Luca recoiled as if struck, Horus's words echoing in their mind. Before they could respond, the door to the bridge exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a plasma blast. Greg stormed into the room, his rifle aimed squarely at Horus's head. "Step away from the kid, you son of a bitch," he snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. Horus slowly raised his hands, a smirk playing across his alien features. "This is only the beginning, human," he sneered. "You cannot stop what is coming. The Akamarian Empire will rise again, and your children will be the key to our ascendancy." With a flash of light, Horus vanished, a hidden teleporter whisking him away to safety. Greg cursed, lowering his rifle. He turned to Luca, the child's face pale and drawn. "Come on, kid, let's get out of here." As they picked their way back through the battle-scarred settlement, Greg's mind raced. Horus's parting words echoed in his ears, a chilling premonition of the trials to come. He looked down at Luca, the child's small hand gripped tightly in his own. He knew with a grim certainty that their fight was far from over. They were standing on the precipice of a galactic conspiracy, one that threatened to consume them all. The battle for the future of humanity had only just begun. As the smoke from the battle cleared, Greg, Rask, and Luca regrouped with Asher and the other colonists in the settlement's cramped command center. They huddled around a flickering holographic display, trying to make sense of the scattered intel they had gathered. Asha tapped at the display, bringing up a star map. "I've been in contact with a group of resistance fighters who've been tracking the Akamarians' movements," she said, her voice tight with tension. "They believe the key to unraveling this whole damn conspiracy is hidden in an Akamarian research facility on Ixion, an icy moon on the edge of the frontier." Greg leaned in, studying the map. "Then that's where we need to go," he said, his jaw set with grim determination. "Whatever the Akamarians are up to, we need to put a stop to it before more kids get hurt." Rask nodded, his scarred face grim. "It won't be easy. That facility will be heavily guarded, and the Nomad's not exactly in top shape after that last scrap." "We'll make it work," Greg growled. "We have to." He turned to Asha. "Do your contacts have any intel on the facility's defenses? Anything that can give us an edge?" Asha's fingers danced across the display, pulling up a schematic of the moon. "They've managed to piece together a partial map of the complex," she said. "Looks like there's a maintenance access point on the south side that might be our best bet for infiltration." As Greg and Rask pored over the schematics, planning their approach, Luca sat huddled in a corner, knees drawn up to their chest. The child's face was pale and drawn, their eyes haunted by the memory of Horus's words. Luca looked up at him, their eyes brimming with tears. "I'm scared, Greg," they whispered. "What if Horus was right? What if I am some kind of monster?" Greg's heart clenched. He knew all too well the weight of feeling like an outsider, of being afraid of your own power. He reached out and placed a hand on Luca's shoulder. "Listen to me, Luca," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're not a monster. You're a kid who's been through hell and back, but you're still standing. That takes strength, not just power." He took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "When I was your age, I was living on the streets of a city back on Earth. I had to fight for every scrap of food, every safe place to sleep. I thought I was nothing, that I'd never amount to anything." Luca's eyes widened. "What changed?" they asked. Greg smiled. "I met someone who believed in me, who saw something more than just a scrappy street kid. They taught me that my past didn't have to define me, that I could use my skills to help people, to make a difference." He squeezed Luca's shoulder. "And that's what you can do, too. Your abilities, whatever they are, they don't make you a monster. They make you special, and you get to choose how you use them." Luca nodded slowly, a glimmer of hope sparking in their eyes. "I want to help," they said, their voice growing stronger. "I want to stop the Akamarians from hurting any more kids." Greg grinned, ruffling Luca's hair. "That's the spirit, kid. Now come on, we've got a mission to plan." As the Nomad approached Ixion, its battered hull shimmering with a cloaking field, Greg and Rask double-checked their weapons and gear. They had managed to patch up the ship's systems enough to get them here, but they knew they would only have one shot at this. "Remember," Greg said, his voice low and urgent, "we get in, we find out what the Akamarians are up to, and we get out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." Rask nodded, his face grim. "And if we run into Horus?" he asked. Greg's eyes hardened. "Then we take him down once and for all." They slipped out of the Nomad, their boots crunching on the icy surface of the moon. The research facility loomed ahead, its stark white walls and gleaming metal towers a jarring contrast against the desolate landscape. They made their way to the maintenance access point Asha had identified, Greg's fingers flying over the keypad as he hacked the lock. The door hissed open, and they crept inside, weapons at the ready. The corridors were eerily silent, the only sound the hum of machinery and the distant echo of footsteps. Greg and Rask moved quickly, following the schematics Asha had provided, their senses on high alert for any sign of trouble. Suddenly a burst of plasma fire erupted from a side passage, scorching the wall inches from Greg's head. He dove for cover, Rask right behind him, as a squad of Akamarian guards poured into the corridor. "So much for stealth," Rask muttered, popping up to snap off a few shots at the advancing guards. Greg gritted his teeth, firing his own weapon in short, controlled bursts. They were outnumbered and outgunned, the Akamarians' superior tech and numbers quickly gaining the upper hand. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, a blinding flash of light erupted in the middle of the corridor. The Akamarian guards went flying, their weapons clattering to the floor as they slammed into the walls with bone-crushing force. Greg and Rask whirled around to see Luca standing behind them, their small frame trembling with exertion, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Luca?" Greg gasped. "What are you doing here? How did you—" But there was no time for questions. More guards were coming, alarms blaring throughout the facility. They had to move now. With Luca in tow, Greg and Rask fought their way deeper into the complex, following the schematics to the heart of the Akamarian operation. They burst into a cavernous laboratory, and the sight that greeted them stopped them dead in their tracks. Rows upon rows of human children, each one strapped to a strange pulsating machine, their small bodies writhing in pain as the Akamarian technology probed and prodded at their very essence. And there, in the center of it all, stood Horus, a triumphant sneer on his alien features. "You're too late, human," he gloated. "The process is already underway. Soon these children will be the vanguard of a new Akamarian empire, their powers honed and amplified by our technology, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Greg's blood boiled with rage. He leveled his rifle at Horus, his finger tightening on the trigger. "We'll see about that," he snarled as he and Rask charged forward, weapons blazing, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in their desperate quest to save the children and put an end to the Akamarian threat once and for all. Greg and Rask stormed through the Akamarian facility, plasma rifles blazing, as they cut down the alien soldiers in their path. Luca was close behind, using their growing psychic powers to shield the humans from the worst of the onslaught. With a wave of their hand, Luca sent a group of charging Akamarians flying, their bodies smashing into the reinforced walls with sickening crunches. As Greg and Rask pushed deeper into the complex, they finally reached the laboratory where the children were being held. The captives were strapped to pulsing machines, their small bodies writhing in agony as the Akamarian technology probed their minds. Luca focused their power, and the restraints snapped open, freeing the children. Suddenly Horus emerged from the shadows, his eyes blazing with rage. He lunged at Greg, and the two warriors collided in a brutal hand-to-hand brawl. They traded punishing blows, grappling and straining for control. Greg ducked under a vicious haymaker and countered with a knee to Horus's midsection, doubling the Akamarian over. Seizing the advantage, Greg locked in a chokehold, squeezing with all his strength. Horus gasped, his face turning a sickly shade of purple. "Why the children?" Greg snarled. "What are you planning to do with them?" Horus choked out his response, his voice raspy. "A rare genetic mutation, psychic powers. We will harness them. The Akamarian Empire will be unstoppable." Disgusted, Greg tightened his grip until Horus went limp, then tossed the unconscious alien aside. He raced back to Rask and Luca, herding the freed children towards the exit. The remaining Akamarian forces swarmed to stop them, but Luca unleashed a psychic shockwave that sent the aliens reeling. As they neared the Nomad, Luca turned back to the facility, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. With a primal scream, they poured their power into the complex's energy core, overloading it. The core detonated in a massive fireball, consuming the facility in a hellish inferno. The Nomad rocketed away from the exploding base, the children safe in its hold. Greg plotted a course for the nearest human colony, determined to blow the lid off the Akamarian conspiracy. But as the ship hurtled through hyperspace, a violent jolt shook the hull. Greg raced to the cockpit, his heart pounding. A massive Akamarian warship filled the viewscreen, dwarfing the Nomad. A deep, menacing voice boomed over the comm. "Surrender the children, human, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and face the full wrath of the Akamarian Empire." Greg looked to Rask and Luca, his features hardening with resolve. "Buckle up," he growled, powering up the Nomad's weapons. "This is going to get ugly." Greg yanked the control yoke hard to the left as a barrage of laser fire strafed the Nomad's hull. The shields flickered, barely holding under the onslaught. Akamarian fighters swarmed around them like angry hornets, pummeling the battered ship from every angle. "Rask, take the controls," Greg barked, unbuckling from the pilot's seat. "Keep them busy while Luca and I suit up." Rask slid into the cockpit, his hands flying over the controls. "This is insane, right? We can't take on a whole damn fleet." "We don't have a choice," Greg shot back, sprinting towards the airlock. "It's either this or we all die." In the cargo bay, Luca was already wriggling into a spacesuit, their small hands trembling as they sealed the helmet. Greg grabbed his own suit, yanking it on with practiced efficiency. "You ready for this, kid?" he asked, checking Luca's seals. Luca nodded, their face pale but determined. "Let's do it." They cycled the airlock, the rush of escaping air propelling them out into the void. Luca clung to Greg's back as he fired his suit thrusters, angling them towards the nearest Akamarian fighter. "All right, Luca," Greg said, his voice crackling over the suit comms. "I need you to give me a psychic boost. Distract that pilot long enough for me to get on board." Greg seized the moment, latching onto the fighter's hull with a grunt. He pried at the cockpit seals, his muscles straining in the vacuum of space. With a final heave, the canopy popped open, and Greg hauled himself inside. The Akamarian pilot lashed out, but Greg was faster. He slammed his fist into the alien's faceplate, shattering the glass. The Akamarian slumped, unconscious, and Greg heaved him out of the cockpit. "Hang on tight, kid!" Greg yelled as he wrenched the fighter into a dizzying spin. Luca clung to his suit, their face pressed against the glass. Together they dove into the heart of the Akamarian formation, lasers blazing. The aliens scattered, caught off guard by the sudden attack from within their own ranks. "Rask now," Greg shouted over the comms. "Jump to hyperspace." The Nomad lurched, its hyperdrive spooling up. With a flash of light, the ship vanished, leaving the Akamarian fleet in disarray. Greg guided the stolen fighter into the Nomad's hangar, the ship shuddering as it dropped out of hyperspace. He clambered out of the cockpit, Luca close behind. "That was too damn close," Rask growled, meeting them in the hangar. "We can't keep running forever. We need a plan." Greg nodded, his face grim. "We need allies. It's time to reach out to the other human colonies, warn them about the Akamarian threat. And Luca," he turned to the child, "I need you to start training the other psychic kids. Teach them how to control their powers. We're going to need every advantage we can get." As the Nomad raced through hyperspace, Greg sent out a galaxy-wide distress call, urging the human colonies to unite against the Akamarian menace. Slowly, tentatively, responses began to trickle in. Asher and the Axion Prime colonists were the first to pledge their support, followed by a ragtag fleet of ex-Akamarian slaves and disillusioned mercenaries. Even some members of the Galactic Council, long neutral in the conflict, began to take notice. They recognized the danger posed by the Akamarian Emperor's ambitions and quietly offered their resources to the growing resistance. But their fragile coalition was soon put to the test. An urgent distress call came from Zephyr 6, a world allied with a technologically advanced species known for their powerful energy weapons. The Akamarians had launched a surprise attack, led by the Emperor himself. Greg, Rask, and Luca raced to Zephyr 6, the Nomad pushing its engines to the limit. But they were too late. The planet was in ruins, its cities reduced to smoldering craters. The corpses of the defenders littered the ground, their advanced weapons useless against the Akamarian onslaught. And there, amidst the devastation, stood the Emperor, his armor splattered with the blood of his victims. Greg stepped forward, his fists clenched. "This ends now," he snarled, his voice raw with grief and rage. "I challenge you to single combat, just you and me." The Emperor laughed, a cruel, grating sound. "You dare to challenge me, human? Very well, I accept." He gestured to his soldiers. "Leave us. I will deal with this worm myself." As the Akamarian troops withdrew, Greg and the Emperor began to circle each other, their eyes locked in a deadly stare. They clashed in a flurry of blows, Greg's speed and agility matched against the Emperor's brute strength. "Why are you doing this?" Greg panted, ducking under a vicious swing. "What do you want with the psychic children?" The Emperor sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. "They are the key to our conquest. With their power under our control, the Akamarian Empire will be unstoppable. We will rule not just this galaxy, but the entire universe." Greg reeled back, horrified by the extent of the Emperor's ambition, but he refused to back down. Battered and bleeding, he charged forward, pouring every ounce of his strength into one final, desperate attack. The Emperor met him head-on, their bodies slamming together with a sickening crunch. They grappled, rolling across the rubble-strewn ground, each fighting for dominance. Greg's vision began to blur, his limbs growing heavy, but he thought of Luca, of the other children, of all the countless lives depending on him. With a roar of defiance, he surged upward, his fist connecting with the Emperor's jaw in a bone-shattering impact. The Emperor staggered, his eyes widening in shock. Greg pressed his advantage, raining down blows with relentless fury. The Emperor's armor cracked and splintered under the assault, his blood spattering the ground. Finally, with a last titanic effort, Greg drove his fist into the Emperor's chest, the alien's ribcage shattering under the impact. The Emperor collapsed, his breath rattling in his throat. Greg stood over his fallen foe, his chest heaving. He knew this was only the beginning. The Akamarian Empire would not rest until they had the psychic children in their grasp. But for now, they had struck a blow against the darkness, a flicker of hope in a galaxy consumed by war. Greg grit his teeth, his muscles screaming with exhaustion, as he parried another blow from the Akamarian Emperor's crackling energy blade. The Emperor snarled, his eyes blazing with a fanatic zeal as he pressed the attack. Around them, the battle raged. Akamarian forces clashing with the ragtag human resistance. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, the stench of ozone and charred flesh hanging heavy over the battlefield. Suddenly, a shockwave rippled outward, sending both Greg and the Emperor stumbling. Greg whirled, his eyes widening as he saw Luca and the other psychic children, their small forms wreathed in an aura of shimmering energy. They thrust their hands forward, and a maelstrom of psychic force erupted from their fingertips. Akamarian soldiers were hurled through the air like rag dolls, their armor crumpling under the onslaught. The Emperor roared in fury, his face contorting with rage. "Elite Guard to me!" he bellowed. A phalanx of towering Akamarian warriors materialized around the Emperor, their genetically enhanced bodies bristling with advanced weaponry. They leveled their weapons at Greg and the children, the hum of charging plasma filling the air. Greg stepped in front of Luca, his rifle raised in defiance. But he knew it was hopeless. There were too many of them. This was the end. But just as the elite guard's fingers tightened on their triggers, a shadow fell across the battlefield. Greg looked up, his jaw dropping in disbelief. A massive armada of ships filled the sky, a kaleidoscope of human, ex-Akamarian and allied vessels united under a common banner. And there, at the head of the formation, was the Nomad, Asha, standing tall on its bridge. "Fire!" Asha yelled, her voice booming across the comm channels. The Allied fleet opened up with everything they had, a storm of missiles and energy beams saturating the Akamarian ranks. The elite guard scattered, their formation disintegrating under the blistering assault. "Fall back!" Greg roared, grabbing Luca's hand and sprinting for the safety of the Allied lines. As they ran, Greg spotted a familiar figure among the Akamarian elite, Horus, his former nemesis, now fighting alongside the Emperor. For a fleeting instant, their eyes met across the chaos of the battle. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. This fight was far from over. This was only the beginning. Hours later, on the outskirts of the ravaged city, the resistance leaders gathered, their faces grim. Greg stood at the center of the group, his armor still scorched and dented from the battle. "The Emperor won't stop," he said, his voice hard. "Not until he has the children. Not until he's ground us into dust under his heel." "Then we don't stop either," Asha replied, her eyes glinting with determination. "We hit him again and again until there's nothing left of his precious empire." Greg nodded, his mind racing. "We need to be smart about this. We go after his supply lines, his weapons factories. We make his war machine grind to a halt." He turned to Luca and the other children. "And you're our secret weapon. We'll train you, hone your powers. Infiltration, sabotage, psychic warfare. You'll be our scalpel, slicing away at the Emperor's power from within." As the resistance dispersed to begin their preparations, Greg felt a buzz at his wrist. He glanced down, frowning at the message scrolling across his comlink's display. It was a set of coordinates deep in Akamarian space, and below a single line of text. "The Emperor's weakness, come alone." Signaling to Rask and his most trusted fighters, Greg strode towards the Nomad, his rifle slung over his shoulder. They had a mission to plan. The Nomad shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the swirling blue and green orb of the Akamarian homeworld filling the view screen. Greg leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in the planet's gleaming cities and sprawling megastructures. Beside him, Luca and the rest of the infiltration team checked their weapons and gear, their faces grim with determination. "All right, listen up," Greg growled, his voice low and intense. "We've got one shot at this, Luca. You're our ace in the hole. Keep those psychic powers of yours cranked up to 11. We need to slip past their defenses like ghosts." Luca nodded, their young face creased with concentration. The team felt a tingling sensation wash over them as Luca's mental cloak settled into place, masking their true identities. The Nomad glided into the planet's atmosphere, its hull shimmering with the disguise of a diplomatic vessel. They touched down on a landing pad in the heart of the capital city, the ship's ramp hissing open to reveal a bustling metropolis of towering spires and alien architecture. Greg and his team strode down the ramp, their boots ringing on the metallic surface. They were dressed in the flowing robes of the Galactic Council, their faces hidden beneath hooded cloaks. Luca walked at the center of the group, their small form dwarfed by the adults around them. As they made their way through the crowded streets, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Akamarians they passed seemed to move with a strange robotic precision, their eyes glazed and unfocused. Rask grunted in agreement, his hand resting on the hilt of his concealed blaster. They pressed on, following the winding streets towards the towering palace at the city's center. Suddenly Luca stumbled, their face going pale. Greg caught them before they could fall, concern etched on his features. "The Emperor," Luca whispered, their eyes wide with fear. "He's not the one in control. There's something else, something ancient and powerful. They're called the Cabal, and they're the ones pulling the strings." Greg's blood ran cold. He looked up at the palace, its spires seeming to twist and warp before his eyes. He knew then that their mission had just become a whole lot more complicated. They reached the palace gates, the Akamarian guards waving them through without a second glance. Luca's psychic cloak was holding, but Greg could see the strain it was putting on the young child. Inside, the palace was a labyrinth of twisting corridors and vaulted chambers. Greg led the team deeper into the structure, following the psychic trail that Luca sensed. They passed groups of Akamarian nobles and officials, their eyes blank and their movements eerily synchronized. Finally, they reached a massive set of doors, carved with intricate symbols that seemed to writhe and shift before their eyes. Luca stepped forward, their small hands pressing against the ancient wood. "They're in there," the child whispered, their voice trembling. "The Cabal, I can feel their power. It's like a black hole sucking at my mind." Greg nodded, his jaw clenched. He signaled to the team and they took up positions on either side of the doors. Luca took a deep breath, their eyes fluttering closed as they focused their power. The doors shuddered, then slowly swung open, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond. Greg and the team stepped inside, their weapons at the ready. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the stench of decay. At the far end, a group of ancient Akamarians sat in a semicircle, their withered bodies draped in tattered robes. Their eyes glowed with a sickly, pulsing light, and their mouths twisted in cruel smiles. "Welcome, humans," one of them rasped, its voice like the cracking of dry bones. "We have been expecting you." Greg felt a wave of psychic energy wash over him, sending him staggering back. Around him, his team cried out in pain, clutching at their heads as the Cabal's power tore at their minds. Luca stepped forward, their small form radiating an aura of pure, blinding light. They raised their hands, and a maelstrom of psychic energy erupted from their fingertips, slamming into the Cabal with the force of a supernova. The elders screamed, their bodies convulsing as Luca's power ripped through their defenses. The chamber shook, chunks of masonry falling from the ceiling as the psychic shockwave tore the room apart. Greg staggered to his feet, his mind reeling from the Cabal's attack. He looked up just in time to see Luca collapse, their small body crumpling to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. The Cabal was in ruins, their ancient bodies twisted and broken, but the cost had been high. Greg stumbled over to Luca, gathering the child's limp form in his arms. Luca, can you hear me?" he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. But the child's eyes remained closed, their face pale and still. Greg felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see Rask standing over him, his face grim. "We need to go," the mercenary said, his voice urgent. "The Emperor's called a ceasefire. We've won." Greg nodded, tears stinging his eyes. He lifted Luca's unconscious body, cradling them close to his chest. As they made their way back to the Nomad, the city around them erupted in chaos. Akamarians stumbled through the streets, their eyes wide with confusion and fear, as the Cabal's control over their minds was suddenly lifted. Greg barely noticed the pandemonium. His focus was entirely on Luca, on the steady rise and fall of their chest as they clung to life. They reached the Nomad, the ramp lowering to grant them access. As Greg carried Luca aboard, a chime sounded from the ship's comm system. He laid the child down gently on a bunk, then made his way to the cockpit. He activated the comm and a holographic figure flickered to life before him. It was the mysterious informant who had set them on this path, their face hidden beneath a hooded cloak. "You have done well, Gregory Wright," the figure said, its voice distorted by the transmission. "The Cabal has been destroyed, and the Akamarian Empire is in disarray. But your fight is not yet over." Greg leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean? What else is out there?" The figure seemed to hesitate, as if weighing its words carefully. "There is a greater threat looming on the horizon, one that will require the united efforts of all the galaxy's species to overcome. You and the child will play a crucial role in the battles to come." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Greg staring at empty air. He slumped back in his chair, his mind racing with the implications of the informant's words. He glanced back at Luca's unconscious form, a sense of grim resolve settling over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that he would face them head-on, with Luca and the rest of his team by his side. As the dust settled in the wake of the Cabal's defeat, the galaxy descended into chaos. The once mighty Akamarian Empire splintered into warring factions, each scrabbling for a piece of the shattered throne. Greg and his battered allies fought to hold the fragile piece together, but it was like trying to plug a dam with their bare hands. Weeks turned to months. Luca remained locked in a coma, their minds shattered by the psychic backlash of their final, desperate attack. Greg was a man torn in two, caught between his duty to lead the resistance and his desperate need to stay by Luca's side. But Luca remained still, trapped in the prison of their own mind. Greg felt helpless, powerless to act as the galaxy burned around him. That was when Horus emerged from the shadows. Greg's hand flew to his blaster as the Akamarian warrior stepped into the room, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I come with a warning," Horus said, his voice low and urgent. "The Cabal was only the beginning. Something far worse is coming." Greg's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Horus told him of the Void, an ancient and malevolent force stirring in the depths of space, a being born from the psychic echoes of every living thing, hungering to consume all life and thought until only darkness remained. Greg's blood ran cold. He looked down at Luca's still form, and he knew what he had to do. He gathered his allies, old and new, and set out on a desperate quest to uncover the truth behind the void. They journeyed to long-forgotten worlds, delving into the ruins of ancient civilizations. They fought their way through hordes of twisted, nightmarish creatures, the void's influence spreading like a cancer across the stars. And in the end, they found the truth. The void was not a single entity but a collective consciousness, a psychic maelstrom threatening to swallow the galaxy whole. The void closed in, a seething mass of shadow and despair. Greg could feel its hunger, its endless need to consume and destroy. He gripped his blaster tight, ready to go down, fighting. And then Luca's eyes snapped open. They sat up in their bed, their mind blazing with newfound clarity and purpose. They reached out across the vast expanse of space, touching the minds of every psychic child in the galaxy. Together they unleashed a burst of pure, blinding light. It seared through the void, tearing it apart from within. The darkness recoiled, weakened and diminished, retreating back into the depths of space. But not before it claimed one final victim. Horus, mortally wounded, collapsed into Greg's arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice fading. "For everything." Greg held him as he breathed his last, tears stinging his eyes. He looked up at Luca, standing tall and strong beside him. They gazed out across the stars, knowing that the void was still out there, waiting and watching. The fight was far from over, but for now there was peace, a chance to heal, to rebuild. And as the galaxy began to pick up the pieces, Greg and Luca stood ready, guardians against the darkness, fighting for the light, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.